So welcome everybody. We are very excited to have you on board on this webinar, which is the 8th in a series of learning webinars by the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. And you have been filling in your name and organization. Thank you very much for that. I see we have people from the Philippines, Bangladesh, Iraq, even Nairobi, as the same as where I'm sitting. So you're most welcome, and we're going to enjoy spending time together today. So Lisa, if you could go to the next slide. As I mentioned, thank you, Lisa. As I mentioned, this is the 8th of a series of 10 webinars that the Academy is rolling out. And the title is Adapting Face-to-Face Learning to Create Online Solutions. This is a topic I think that has created a lot of interest. I know many of you, I've seen our teachers in learning institutions, in the universities, and with COVID, I think this is something we're all grappling with. How do we still reach our students, despite the fact that we cannot see each other face to face? So we're looking forward to hearing more from Olivia on her experience of changing face-to-face learning into online. Next slide, please. So there are three of us who will be facilitating this session. My name is Sheila Waruhiu. I'm the Talent Management and Capacity Building Manager for Save the Children International, and I'm based in Nairobi. And then we have Olivia Scaramuzza, who you'll be listening to mostly during this session. And Olivia is based in London. She's program manager for the Humanitarian Capacity Building team within Save the Children UK. And then we have Lisa, who many of you already know if you've been joining these webinars, who's been doing an excellent job of facilitating. And Lisa is learning advisor for the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. So the three of us will be assisting you as we move along the whole webinar. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, please use the chat box to interact. We've set this up as a webinar, so you're not really able to see other participants. However, I can tell you at the moment we are 111. We have about 600 who've registered for this webinar, so we are quite a few, but we are still able to communicate through the chat box, so please feel free to do that. There is also a Q&A box which you could use at the bottom of the panel. You'll be able to use the Q&A box to ask specific questions. We'll have two sessions today where we can actually put in or respond to questions. One will be about halfway through the webinar, and then once again at the end. So please feel free to put in your questions in the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll make our best effort to respond to those halfway through the session. A reminder that the session is recorded, and we do encourage active listening. And at the end of it, you'll be able to claim your badge at the website where you registered for this webinar. The Twitter handle is over there for those of you who do tweet, and we look forward to working with you. Next slide. Right, so this is the point at which I hand over to Olivia, and look forward to the session, Olivia.
Thank you, Sheila. Welcome, everyone. I won't lose a lot of time to discuss the agenda, just so you know roughly the structure of the session. So we are going into a bit of a refresher on how to move face-to-face content to on the online platform and what form it can take, and then we'll talk about what it can mean in practice. So I'll give an example of the program I manage, which is in Humanitarian Capacity Building, and then I'll discuss some of the lessons learned and the pros and cons of that solution. So that's the rough agenda for this webinar. And before we get started, just to understand, there's a lot of us in this room, 127 already. So we wanted to understand how confident you are when it comes to adapting face-to-face learning to online solutions. And Sheila, I believe, is going to launch a poll. Yeah, it should appear on your screen now. So 1 being not confident at all and 5 being really confident. So we're getting a few answers. We are average for now. We have about a lot of 3s and 4s. Some not confident at all. It's okay to say it. It is a safe space. And the results are in. I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but the average of the room is halfway through confidence, which is a healthy place to be in. We have some really confident people and some not confident at all. So again, with that many of us in the room, I hope it will be helpful to all of you, and we'll certainly do our best to answer your questions. All right, Lisa, we can move to the next slide. So let's get started. As I said, this session is mostly meant as a quick refresher on online learning. It's not too heavy on theory. We're just going to go through the different modalities. So let's just accept it's a completely different tool. You're never going to get the results you have in a face-to-face training right online. So you have less time. You should not aim to transcribe word by word. It's not realistic. Try to aim for content that you can adapt online. Some content is just meant for face-to-face, and we have to accept that. It's not about solving everything through online solutions. So we really need to be realistic from the get-go. It's also going to be a different kind of learner engagement. So how are you going to break the ice? How are you going to create that group mentality that's going to be so useful for experience sharing and group activities? You will need to work much harder to achieve this. Online is bound to be less interactive, and it's also okay to say that. Technology, of course, is going to be a challenge. So internet is always a challenge. Some software and tools are very heavy, and sometimes in the race for innovation, this is forgotten about. So try to understand where your target audience is based and what they are working with, because sometimes even accessing a laptop is complicated. So no need for a virtual reality experience that no one is going to benefit from. And then ask yourself, has this been done by someone else? So is this content already created? Do you really need to reinvent the wheel, or can you curate resources that are already out there? It's consider partnerships. Again, sometimes it's just easy to take a step back, think really about what you're trying to achieve and what are the ways, rather than rushing into a solution that you think is the best. Lisa, if you can move to the next slide. So in terms of modalities, elements to think about when you're designing your online solutions, if you ask yourself those questions, the answer should help you find the right solution. So do you need to be present at the same time as the learner? Are you talking about a live webinar like we are doing today, a live workshop, or do you need to allow the learner to learn in their own time, in which sense you might want to create online solutions that you won't need to moderate. Where will the learning take place? Again, if it's a live webinar, it might be Blackboard, it might be Zoom. If it's an online module, you might need to work with the software and then create a learning management system, LMS, to host it on. Are you going to add discussion forum? Are you going to send extra readings? Are you going to try to add on assignments? And who do you need to make it all work? So really, it's about understanding what you are trying to achieve. And then the pace is really important. Can the learners access the materials in their own time? Or do they need to log in at the same time as you? Do you need to really have an eye on who's in the room and make sure everyone is engaging? Are resources going to be available to download after the learning has taken place, and in which formats? This will inform what kind of results you're going to end up with. Lisa, next slide, please. So this is where I make you work. Can you use the chat box to share with the group what you think is a good online learning experience? And we're looking for, keywords or a short sentence. You as an adult, what does work when it comes to online learning? Engaging, interactive, short sessions, peer-to-peer learning, simple, concise, relevant, wow, authentic, yes, micro-learning, participatory, inclusive, clear audio. You guys are inspired. That's brilliant. Diversity and short session. Yeah. So obviously, there is not an exhaustive list of answers to that question. The reality is participation needs to be voluntary. You can't force anyone into doing an online learning. It needs to be active rather than passive, and you need to have clear aims and learning outcomes. For online learning, no matter the approach you're using, all of this applies, all of your answers apply. If the learner feel that they are not learning anything, they are going to completely disengage from that virtual environment you're trying to create. So it can really be hard to keep an eye on each single individual you want to reach. You will know when your learning solution has worked, when you get feedback from the learners, and that's the most important. Are they engaging with you? Are they giving you feedback? Do you have a rating system maybe that tells you whether your module or your online solution is relevant? It's really important to have those mechanisms that allow you to monitor how your online solution is faring into the world, because you don't want to release it and forget about it. It needs to be relevant and fill a gap. So with this brief overview on online learning considerations, let's quickly dig into blended learning, just again as a refresher. Brilliant, Lisa, thank you. So blended learning, as it's written on paper, it's a hybrid approach that combines online and face-to-face training. And it can take many different formats. So it can be face-to-face, virtually delivered, facilitated, self-paced, can be remotely, can be coached. There is not one single model that is rocket science. It's just about adapting to the fact that it's getting increasingly harder to deliver learning just one way. In my career, I've managed a few models of blended learning, from very rigorous ones that are super linear, where you have a residential, then you have a period of blended learning, distance learning with live webinars and assignments. The focus is on how you're going to achieve the learning outcomes you set, rather than that method of delivery you used to use. So obviously, in terms of advantages, the learner is going to hopefully have more control over how and when they wish to engage. They can access learning in their own time and their own pace, and that's extremely important, because the reality is that your target audience is probably professional adults that have a heavy workload, so, and an unreliable technology, access to technology. So how do you make sure that you are not alienating the people who need the learning the most? Self-paced courses are super effective when it comes to sharing information widely and timely, and especially if what you are creating as an online solution is around compliance, such as safeguarding or code of conduct. Through your online learning, you can disseminate widely to the communities you work with, to your staff, to your partners, or to volunteers. So it's about teaching and training at scale. Obviously, there are very obvious limits, so limited engagement and interactivity, again, we've mentioned it. The learning impact may be limited, and it's about accepting that loss of control. You need to surrender it. And also, self-paced courses, the creation of them can be expensive to develop, okay? And you will need to keep it up to date. So with those considerations in mind, and before we move on to what this means in practice and to the what I'm going to tell you about the program I manage, do you have any questions that I might have left unanswered that could be related to that first section?
So far, no questions, Olivia, unless one comes up at the moment, but so far, no questions.
Brilliant. I'm going to give it 2 minutes for the people who need to think, and feel free to add your questions to the chat box. if we don't have time to answer it now, there will be plenty of time at the end.
I think people are still thinking. Feel free to type it. Yes, we have one. I think online learning can also be significantly cheaper than face-to-face if done right, and if it allows levels of scale and accessibility that face-to-face doesn't really give. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So again, there might be a cost when you create your online solution that you are going to find is nothing compared to the results you're going to get. So it's really about mapping what you're trying to achieve, because face-to-face, you're going to need a room, you're going to need to fly in people, you're going to need to pay for food, sometimes per diem. So, and you might train, what, 20 people, when through a face-to-face for the same cost, you're going to train thousands. So it's an investment and it's a different way of doing trainings, but it's something we are more shifting towards in those days and ages.
Olivia, we have another question. Is there prescribed duration or optimum and number of learners for online methods? So I think optimum number of learners for online methods.
Depends on what you choose to do, really. If it's a live webinar and you want active participation, making sure people are engaged, you don't want to have 200 people in the room. If it's something like a module of code of conduct that people are doing self-paced, you're not going to care really about who takes it, because it's a module that is living their own life. So it's really about which tool you're using. And we won't go too much into that, obviously, because there's plenty of resources that exist that compare tools and what you're trying to shift through them, but it's all based on what it is you are teaching about. And I'm seeing, has there been research in terms of attention span in online learning versus face-to-face? I don't know if there's been research, probably. I know that I get distracted really easily. So what I'm trying to do when I design a learning solution is not bore myself. And it's really hard to achieve, but just do your online learning. And if you can't deal with it, it's a good indication that it's not working well. But the reality is that face-to-face, it's always more easy to get people attention. Right. Sheila, if you can keep track of the questions,
Yes,
I'm going to
will do.
keep going and we'll answer them at the end.
No problem.
All right. So what it means in practice. I thought I would give you an overview of the program I've managed and how we've dealt with shifting to an increasingly online presence. So I manage the Humanitarian Operations Program, which is a 15-year-old flagship capacity building program at Save the Children UK. It has changed a lot over the years. It used to be very linear. It was a 6-month program that was very costly to run, blending residential trainings and some live webinars, as well as rigorous assignments. The aim of the program hasn't changed. It was always meant to strengthen the capacity of staff working in emergency responses. It was designed for those wishing to understand the fundamental principles of humanitarian action and really understanding all the different functions of humanitarians, so that ultimately you understand that it's not you working in a response, you're part of a bigger picture and you're trying to support your colleagues. The HOP, the Humanitarian Operations Program, is an entry-level program. So it's really meant at people who are launching their careers in the humanitarian sector or transitioning from the development sector. And sometimes also people who have never been formally trained and really need that refresher. So in 2016, we commissioned a review of the program. And while we found some very, very positive outcomes, we had some recommendations that we decided to implement to build the hub forwards. So it was about recognizing the changing nature of the humanitarian landscape and the desire to embrace different learning methodologies. Making a shift to an increasingly virtual learning environment so that we would cut down on support staff and financial resources. So we redesigned the program to that effect, and our drivers were about accessibility, scalability, localization, and reach. We focus on that flexible fit for purpose learning, and really what we wanted was making sure we reached those targets that mattered the most, namely those working in regions affected by emergencies. Obviously, we had financial sustainability in mind, increasingly limited human resources and support staff. We had to reinvent the way we worked. So, next slide, please, Lisa. This is the hub now. So it's highly flexible based on need, and we've really moved away from that heavy linear approach to end up with a design that enables the learner and organizations to access flexible learning. So it doesn't matter if you can't pay for your learning, it's probably available for you online and for free. So to the right of your screen, you have the 3 levels of the hub. I won't go into too much details because I'm going to talk to you about the first level, which is hub fundamentals. And that's what you see on the left of the screen. It is an open access, self-paced series of interactive modules that we are hosting on Kaya. So together, they provide a streamlined learning journey, and they cover topics in emergency responses. And basically what we've done is that we've adapted most of the classroom elements from the previous version of the program, and we've added some additional sessions that reflect the changing nature of humanitarian action. So now they are open access, self-paced, completely online, and anyone in the world can take them. The next levels are core and response, which are residential trainings. Core is country focused, response is regionally focused, and we are really talking about application of learning with additional mentoring, coaching, and experiential learning. But all of those are complementary. It doesn't mean that they are exclusive. Some people are quite happy to stick to the digital aspect of the program. Lisa, if we can go to the next slide. Brilliant. So which option did we choose to adapt our face-to-face content to this new online reality? So bear in mind that this is just one example of many, okay? Online learning does not mean complicated. It does not need to be a SCORM on a learning management system. I'm going to talk to you about my experience of the hub, but this is not only one way to do it. So what did we have to consider? We needed to understand which key modules needed to be part of that online package. And then we needed to decide whether to curate, were they available on the internet, and could we get them through a partnership with another organization, or did we need to create the content? So out of the 40 modules that make up Hub Fundamentals, we created only 9 of them. Okay, we created those we felt were gaps. Either what existed wasn't comprehensive enough, or it wasn't pitched at the right level. Then it was a matter of securing subject matter experts who can help you write and update the content, who's got that technical expertise, so you can be sure that no matter what you're working on is relevant. And then we had to ask ourselves, do you want to outsource module creation or hire a team of people who know how to create module and just welcome them? So outsourcing the module is the easy way forward. Unfortunately, it's probably the most expensive way. When you find that module creation that is outsourced can probably cover the salary of your digital experts hired in-house for a year. So really take a step back and understand, is it one module you're trying to create or more? And if it's more, it might be easier to recruit someone within your team. And then it's about the subject matter experts, the online module experts, and the adult learning experts working together to achieve what you set to achieve. So what we use this time around for the curious people in the room, we use RISE, which is a rapid e-learning development tool. And it basically allows anybody to develop quick e-learning web-based solutions. The end results will be quite generic, but ultimately it does the trick. and it's quite user-friendly. So that's Rise. And then we use Photoshop and Illustrator to make it more bespoke and exciting and user-friendly in a way that is more personalized and increase the levels of interactivity. So once the SCORM is finalized, so that module you created, we set it up as a new module on Kaya, we nest it on Hop Fundamentals, and then we share it with partners also, just to make sure we disseminate it widely. So as you can see, the little arrows at the bottom of the screen, this is roughly the process. So it's about mapping what's out there, designing the learning outcomes. So who is your target audience and what do they need to know at that level? Secure your subject matter experts. You might need to pay them, so you will need to add that money also. Creating the content and then transferring it onto a storyboard, which is roughly a session plan for your module. So it says title, this is the content, and this is what we could be working with. Then it's about having a creative meeting between all stakeholders to discuss the look and feel of what you're trying to achieve. You get a first draft, which you get to review in Rise. So you leave the feedback saying, can you tweak that or can you add that? And then after the final review, you just send it for testing before you launch it widely. Because obviously, once you launch it in the wild web, it's very hard to get it back after that. Next slide, please, Lisa. So this is just a bunch of screen captures from Hub Fundamentals and the modules we've created, so you can see what we are working with. For example, this is from our Humanitarian Comms module. So this is really the look we've achieved. So we've moved from a PowerPoint presentation to something that looks quite neat and very easily through Rise. Next, please, Lisa. Here is just me making the case for using as many case studies as possible. In any face-to-face training, it makes more sense if you can embed the theory using practical examples. So any case study about real life situation will help the learner understand how they link the theory to the practice. Next slides, please. Here is something we've tried out. So it is Yasmin. So this is our responsible data management in emergencies module, which can be quite dry when you think about it. So we've created that Yasmin character. We've given her a background, and basically the learner helps Yasmin navigate complex humanitarian situations, applying the learning to a real life example. Next, please. Here is our WASH module. So those are examples on how you can improve the interactivity of your module. So there's a very simple matching activity on the left of your screen, matching number to the standards, just making sure your learner is actively engaged in what you're saying. And to the right, there's a simple picture and they need to recognize which kind of latrine this is about. Again, just making sure it's not about digesting content, but also actively applying that newfound knowledge. Next, please. This is another example for introduction to history of humanitarianism. There's a lady that is talking to you, you can't ignore her, and she's asking you questions about the course. So again, just moving away from just pure bland theory, how can you make sure you've got your learners' attention? Next, please. And here is a very simple drag and drop. So here it's on operations management. You need to understand which card belongs to which category, and it's just a matter of clicking for the solution. So all of those are examples of how you can make sure your learning solution is a bit more interactive. Those are really easily achievable. I would just say there are a couple options also for reflection, so asking learners to think about a situation and then giving them the answers when they scroll down, or locking an activity so they can go further into the course until they complete it. So it's just making sure again that rather than clicking and getting that completion certificate, they actually understood what the module is about. And with those words, I'm going to pause for more question and to take a drink of water also.
No worries. Thanks, Olivia. So we have a bunch of questions which I've grouped, and the first group is really looking at accessibility. There are questions about internet access, technology access, even just understanding the technology. How do you deal with that? Maybe you can handle that one first.
Yeah, so that's my one biggest fight, fighting people in London so that they understand that when you travel to South Sudan or Burkina, it's really, really hard to get a stable internet connectivity. And I actually love when I'm delivering trainings in those countries because I can completely cut off from London. But the reality is not great for online learning. So there are platforms such as Kaya, which is out of the Totara system, where the learning, all the modules can be downloaded. So you can complete the modules without an internet connection. And then when you're back online, your results are updated automatically. So it means you haven't lost record of the completion. That is an option. Obviously, for module creation, you will need a stable internet connection. But then when you release those modules into the world, you can navigate around those solutions. I know when I was doing webinars, live webinars, I would record them and then upload them onto a YouTube channel, because the reality is that a lot of people have YouTube through their phones. So it's about understanding again, what can you do and what is it you're trying to achieve. The system Kaya is part of is Totara. I'm just replying to Adria now because I'm seeing that question now.
Okay. No worries. Do you want to respond to that, and then I can go with the next lot of questions?
There you go. It's
done.
answered already.
Okay, super. All right, so the next set of questions is around assessments. How do you really know that you're assessing, the people have learned, the assessment around online learning? How reliable is it?
Well, the reliability obviously is very hard to understand, especially if you don't have time to monitor each user. The reality is that you always have a bunch of users who are not really interested, and you have to accept it. If you are embedding assignments within your online solution, as I said, you can lock further completion of the module until you are sure that, for example, if you've set up a quiz with 10 questions, you can say, well, the user needs to have 8 questions right before they can move forward. So this is really about understanding whether the activities within your module are completely compulsory, or if they are just meant as a way to test before you move forward. I know that I don't always lock access to content because I don't want to discourage people who might not be interested in a certain section from breadth. Is there anything else, Sheila?
I think we're good for now. We can move on, and we'll bring in the next set later on.
Brilliant. Okay, powering through. Okay, so this is the last session of me talking at you guys. Hopefully it's not too painful. It was just about lessons learned and a roundup about what I discussed this morning. So generally speaking, online again is not meant to replace face-to-face, but rather complement it. So which of your sessions that you traditionally deliver face-to-face can you move online? Some sessions I know I keep face-to-face because they really benefit from experience sharing and from more practical group work, for example. I'm thinking about a session I have on well-being in emergencies, where I really need people to feel safe about talking about their experience and coping mechanisms. So it's okay to say, well, you know what, this session or this whole course is not meant to be 100% digital. Can I create a blended solution that would allow me to use a bit of different learning modalities? Consider your dissemination strategies. Great, you've created that online content. Now, how do you reach the people who actually need that content? How do you let them know it's available? Which platform do you use? Never underestimate the power of communications. It's good to have a strategy. Now, strategy is a scary word, but understand how you're going to let people know, your target audience, that it's available. And then doing the learning, how can you make sure learners are completing and not just registering and forgetting about it? Because it is a reality. Oh, that looks like an interesting course. I want to do it. And then, oh, I'm distracted. I'm going to move on. So on that, I'm suggesting incentives. So there is badging, there is certificates of completion. People do love to have those proof that they've completed the learning, and then they can justify it when they go to look for a job or for a career progression. Sending reminders to also, hey, have you completed that learning? Is helpful, though it's more intensive in terms of human resources. So in terms of pros when it comes to advantages, when it comes to moving the hub content online, the reach is incredible. So we had planned for 4,000 users in 3 years, and we reached triple that number, 12,000 users in a year and a half. For me, there's also a coherence of content. So when people tell me I've completed the finance and emergencies module, I know exactly what they have done. Because the reality is when you do face-to-face, the learning environment, the facilitators, the accents, it might be very hard to understand and make sure everyone is at the same level of understanding, and we can move to the next stages if needed. It also filters motivation. So we have a lot of people doing that online content. We have a lot less doing our face-to-face training. You filter those people who could probably just benefit from a few online modules and don't need to go through the full program. In terms of languages, it is so easy to translate and disseminate to whole new regions. For example, out of the 9 modules we've created, I just finished reviewing them all and their translation into French, and we are ready to launch in West and Central Africa. We are going to translate most of them in Portuguese to support the staff and partners in Mozambique. So it's really about, hey, you have that solution that works. Now you can make it even more accessible to a lot of people rather than recruiting a trainer that speaks the local language, flying them in, and so on and so forth. I also find it's user-friendly and quite easy to navigate. It does not need to be overly complicated. And using bit word again, like virtual reality, take a step back. Who is your learner? Do they know how to access the learning? And can we keep it simple to achieve the same results? Limits in no particular order, very difficult for when you need to tweak or update the content. You release a module into the world, great. Then how do you make sure the module is still relevant a year or 2 down the line? Really need to take that into account. I've found translating the English modules into French that already made a lot of tweaks. So it's really an endless process. So obviously less intensive than reviewing the modules every time you deliver them online, but it is a real consideration. You need to resources. So as I said, subject matter experts, online content creation experts, adult learning methodologies experts, supporting staff. It can be onerous, but is it more onerous than face-to-face or outsourcing the creation of your module? And finally, it can be a lengthy process. So initially we had said we'll have a module every 2 weeks. The reality is that it took a month and a half at best to create a module. So really take that into account. You're not going to create great learning solutions right away in a few days. Right, so before we open up to questions, I would just hammer it again. Consider what it is you're trying to achieve. Sometimes a webinar or an online workshop using Zoom or Blackboard or Google Hangouts, it's enough. Innovation and high-end products are very fashionable these days, but are they always justified? when you get people to translate the content from you, always get a native speaker to review this, because often the translators do not have the right background, and you will need to adapt their translations to the sector you're working in. Again, when you release a module at a large scale, is your content global enough? I've had to really look back and work with the subject matter experts so that the modules we were working in weren't too save the children specific. Know your audience. If it's meant for the sector, you need to remove everything that is too heavy on your organization. But it's still a very positive experience. We felt like trailblazers at time because we've made mistakes in my team. We've paved the way in a way because some people in my team are doing that now. It's about troubleshooting technical glitches. One good tip I can give you is that if you are doing an online module on Rise or Articulate, when you look at references, never link PDF or links, active links on the internet, because they expire and it means your module is no longer relevant. So that's something I've learned going along. I'll stop at that just to allow enough time for questions, but I'm all ear, guys.
Thank you so much, Olivia. So actually, the first question is very linked to what you were talking about just now. Do you have some quick tips on how to adapt face-to-face learning to online learning, something that people can do quickly as a result of COVID? Any quick tips?
Quick tips. So don't expect to have a 2-hour session. So it's about the length of your session. Really focus on what is important. Lose the jargon, lose the technicality, and encourage, in a way, participation. So do people have an inbox they could contact if they have more questions about the module? Have they access to someone who could support them, or a discussion forum? In light of COVID, because it is evolving so quickly, I would not encourage fixed solutions. I would probably say go for a live webinar that focus on the most important points. You are not going to solve all the problems through online learning. What really, really matters to your audience. But this is top line again. This would probably need to be another hour-long webinar.
Understandably. There's another question around gadgets for online learning, phones versus tablets, etc. So obviously, before you start, there's recommendation. Of course, you do a survey. Any top thoughts around gadgets when you're doing a survey to decide the kind of online learning that you should do?
What I do before each training or content creation is that I do a quick learning needs assessment. So just ask that question up front. What kind of technology do you have access to? How reliable is your internet connection? If we are to adapt some online content to WhatsApp, would it work for you? Or Facebook or YouTube? What do you have access to? Because no one will know better than your potential learners. So if you can add maybe a month before just disseminating a learning needs assessment and asking those questions, that will probably troubleshoot a lot of problems down the line.
Okay, great. This one is around translations, and you alluded to it a bit earlier. How do you know when you have the best version that's ready to go online? What's the indicator to know that?
So one thing I've learned is good enough. Don't strive for perfection. Doesn't really work. However, as I said, when you outsource translation, you are working with a group of translators who just are not necessarily specialized in what you're doing. So I'm talking about humanitarian, for example. There are a lot of technical terms that you don't really use in a day-to-day life. So it's about, hey, you guys are going to do most of the work, translate the modules, but then I'm going to refine it using an expert that is a native speaker and that has an understanding of the humanitarian sector. I just say that, but because, for example, working in Cox's Bazar, we translated training modules into Bengali. And then we realized when we reached the classroom that people did not read formal Bengali just as well, and they were asking for the English slides instead. So just try to think before you rush into a solution.
Okay, I think that wraps it up for now for questions. Maybe we can move on with the slides.
It is actually the end, Sheila. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, okay, great. So thank you so much for participation. I can see already we're getting thank you messages in the box. Olivia, we are very, very grateful to you for coming in. I know we came also at the last minute. Thank you for making time to join us and to take us through this session. So for all those who've been through, if there are questions we've not been able to answer, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our contacts will be available at the end. Remember, you can claim your digital badge from the website. And many of you have already done that, so you know the process. It's quite simple. All you have to do is fill in a reflective document. And please do sign up for the next 2 webinars. The details are on the screen. Details of contacting us are also on the screen. Thank you for your time. It's been a really, really good learning exercise. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a beautiful Friday.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.